The announcement had already been spoken. I heard the words leave Chancellor Edrin's mouth, the formal cadences of pact betrothal law, the name of the house my council had chosen, the date they had selected without consulting me, and I turned from the dais with the specific, deliberate stillness I had spent my whole reign perfecting. The great hall of Varneth was loud with the sound of 300 wolves accepting what had just been declared on their king's behalf. Myra of Edrath was standing at the far door. She had a satchel over one shoulder, the worn brown leather one she carried everywhere, stuffed with parchment and ink pots and the small penknife she used to sharpen her quills. She had been here 2 months, transcribing the old archive records the pack librarian couldn't read anymore, and she had been leaving her ink-stained corrections in the margins of my own historical notes. And I had been reading every one of them, and I had been meaning, for 6 weeks, perhaps 7, to find the right moment to say something that was not about historical records. Our eyes met across the length of the hall. Her face was entirely composed. That was what I remembered afterward, in the years that followed, not tears, not anger, not the small flinch of a woman surprised. Just that composed, clear face, as though she had always understood that this was the shape of things, and she had simply been waiting to confirm it. She adjusted the satchel on her shoulder, and she walked out, and the door closed behind her without a sound. I did not call out. That was the first failure, and it was the one I could not forgive. I had not sought a mate. Let that be understood from the beginning, not because I was cold, or because the bond did not call to me, but because I had ruled Varneth alone since I was 23 years old, and I had learned, in the 12 years since, that longing without wisdom was simply a different kind of weakness. I had watched my father spend his reign chasing the feeling of the bond rather than the fact of it, and I had sworn I would not make the same mistake. The council, by the time I was 35, had grown impatient with my patience. They were not wrong that the pack needed stability. They were not wrong that a formal line of succession mattered. What they were wrong about was the assumption that because I had not spoken, I had not decided. I had decided imprecisely, and without the clean formality they preferred, and in the margins of archived documents, and across half a dozen late evenings in the library where a scribe healer from Edrath had argued with me about the accuracy of the Northern Accord of 1144, and had been, infuriatingly, correct. I had not had the words yet. I had been looking for them, and in the time it took me to find them, my counsel had spoken for me. She was gone by morning. I knew because I went to the archive before the sun rose. The hall was quiet, the great fires banked low, frost on the inside of the high windows, and found the table where she had been working for 2 months cleared of everything except a small folded note addressed to the librarian, thanking him for the use of the space and the good candles. Her handwriting was very even. She had always had even handwriting. I had told her once, while reading her margin corrections, that her letters were too precise for a woman who claimed to work quickly, and she had looked at me with that calm, assessing look she had, and said that precision was not the same as slowness, and that I might consider the difference. I stood at her empty table for a long time. Then I went back to my chambers, and I rolled up my right sleeve, and I looked at what had appeared on the inside of my wrist sometime in the night, while she was riding south, while I was failing to sleep, while the bond did what it does when it has already decided, regardless of whether the king in question has gotten around to saying the right words. A mate mark, pale at first, the color of smoke, already darkening at the edges to the deep gray blue of Varneth stone. I pulled my cuff down over it. Then I sat at my desk, and I began to read pack law. The betrothal announcement, as Chancellor Edrin was pained to explain, had the full weight of council authority behind it. The house that had been named, a respectable northern family, no quarrel with them, had already sent formal acknowledgement. Pack law in Varneth, as in most Highland territories, recognized council betrothal as binding pending the king's formal acceptance ceremony, which was scheduled without my input for the following spring. I listened to Edrin explain all of this across a meeting table, while I kept my right hand flat on my thigh beneath the table's edge. "And if the king declines formal acceptance?" I asked when he finished. Edrin looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has served 3 kings and believed he had seen every variety of royal inconvenience. "It would be an extraordinary breach of council protocol, my lord." I didn't ask about protocol. I asked about law. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "There is a provision, A true mate bond, if documented and witnessed, supersedes council arrangement under the Northern Pact Compact of 1089. But the compact requires both parties to present, both marks visible and confirmed by pact witnesses, and the bond must be of sufficient age and clarity to be indisputable. He paused. It is rarely invoked. I imagine not, I said. I thanked him and ended the meeting. The mark was clear within a week. By the end of the first month, it was as vivid as old ink against my wrist, unmistakable to anyone who looked, which was why I wore my cuff button to the wrist in all company and did not remove it, and why I said nothing to anyone, and why I sat alone in the evenings and read the Northern Pact Compact of 1089 until I could have recited it without the document. The compact's language was precise in exactly the way Myra would have appreciated. I thought about that, about how she would have read it, and what she would have said, and how she would have found the structural flaw in the council's position before I had finished explaining it. I thought about her constantly, and with the same deliberate patience I applied to everything else. The spring acceptance ceremony came. I did not attend. I sent Edrin a letter formally citing a governing emergency in the Eastern Border Territory. There was one, conveniently. There is always one, and I postponed. The postponement created significant council unpleasantness. I let it be unpleasant. Summer, I postponed again. The bundles began arriving from Edrath in midsummer. This was not her doing. The border settlement had a standing commission from Varnith's archive for historical transcription work, and the librarian had sent the next batch of documents south, and they came back annotated, as they always did, because the scribe healer the settlement employed was thorough. Her handwriting was in the margins. I read her margin notes before I read the documents. She was well. I knew this because her notes were precise and occasionally sharp and twice outright argumentative about the archive's dating of the Third Highland unification. And a woman who argues in the margins of historical documents across 3 days' distance is, definitively, alive and herself. I filed the documents. I kept the pages with her annotations separate in the back of my private desk drawer, which I did not examine too closely as a habit. Autumn of the first year. The council's patience had become something with teeth. I sat through 3 formal sessions in which the betrothal delay was discussed with increasing directness, and I listened to all of it, and I said each time that I was aware of my obligations and would address them in due course. This was not a lie. I was, in fact, addressing them, in the library, late at night, reading every case in which the Northern Pact Compact's mate bond clause had been invoked in the last 400 years. There were 11 cases. 7 had succeeded. The 4 that had not failed on technical grounds, documentation, witnessing, or the disputed clarity of one party's mark. I noted what had gone wrong in each of those 4 cases and ensured I would not repeat the errors. First snow of the second year, and another bundle from Edrath. This one included a transcription of a border settlement record I had not specifically requested, a history of Edrath itself, its founding, its connection to the old Highland Pact lines, written in the clear, even hand I had come to know better than most things. At the bottom of the last page, in the margin, in smaller letters than her usual annotations, this settlement has better records than most pacts give it credit for. The librarian at Varnith might find the attached appendix of interest. I read the appendix twice. It was excellent historical work. I set it aside with the others and sat for a long while in the quiet of my study. She was still herself. This was everything and also insufficient. By the second year, I had what I needed from the compact. The formal dissolution of a council betrothal, when superseded by a documented mate bond, required 3 things: the king's formal written renunciation of the betrothal, signed and witnessed; a pact council session in which the renunciation and the bond evidence were presented; and the visual confirmation of both marks by no fewer than 5 pact witnesses of senior standing. The first thing I had been able to do since the morning after she left. The second required the council, and the council required managing. I will not detail every conversation here. Edrin deserves his privacy, and some of what was said between us in those sessions was not fit for a formal record. What I will say is that I am a patient man and I understand leverage, and that by the beginning of the 3rd year I had 5 council members who understood the mate bond provision well enough to witness a presentation, and 1 chancellor who had come to understand, finally, that there are things a king will not be persuaded on. The 3rd thing required Myra. Edrath in early winter was a 2-day ride from Varneth Hold in good conditions. I left at dawn on the 3rd day of the first snow of the 3rd year, alone, with my cuff buttoned to the wrist and a document case under my arm and no particular plan beyond arriving and seeing what her face did. The road south through the Highland Pass was cold and clear. My wolf ran parallel to my horse for most of the 2nd day, which he had not done in years, not since before the council's announcement, when I had still gone out regularly into the open country north of the hold for the kind of running that has no purpose beyond the running itself. I had stopped doing that, and he had grown quiet in the way a wolf grows quiet when his person has stopped listening. Now on this road, he was beside me, gray and large and unconcerned with the cold, and I rode and he ran and neither of us spoke, which is the correct way to have that particular conversation. I reached Edrath in the afternoon of the 2nd day, when the light was already going and the first evening smoke was rising from the settlement's stone houses. It was smaller than I had imagined, not poor, just compact, the self-contained efficiency of a border settlement that has been taking care of itself for 300 years and sees no reason to change the arrangement. The archive building was near the center, marked by the specific kind of sign that indicates a place where serious work happens and interruptions are not welcomed. I went in anyway. She was at a long table near the window, with a candle burned nearly to its base and 3 documents spread in front of her, and an ink pot open to her right. Her hair was down and her coat was still on. The room was not especially warm, and she was writing in the margin of the center document with the kind of focused stillness I had watched across 2 months in my own archive, and then been without for 3 years. The penknife was on the table beside the ink pot, small and worn and the same one as always. She did not look up immediately. When she did, her face did the thing I had been trying to predict for 3 years and could not, which was to do nothing at all, or almost nothing, just a small adjustment around her eyes, a settling, as though something she had been holding at a particular angle had shifted. "You're far from the hold," she said. "Yes," I said. A silence. Not uncomfortable, or it was, but not in the ordinary way. It was the discomfort of 2 people who have said many things to each other across a table, and then went 3 years without saying anything and now have to calculate where to begin. "The betrothal," she said, not a question. "It's been dissolved," I said, "formally by council session 3 weeks ago. The documentation is complete." I set the case on the edge of the table. "I brought the records in case you wanted to see them." She looked at the case, and then at me, and her expression was the one she had used on the Northern Accord of 1144, the one that meant she had an opinion and was deciding how much of it to share. "You came 3 days' ride in first snow to show me council documents." "No," I said. "I came to show you something else." I unbuttoned my right cuff. The mark was fully settled now, 3 years old and dark as old ink, the same Varneth stone blue-gray it had been since the first weeks, covering the inside of my wrist from the base of my thumb to the pulse point. I turned my arm so the candlelight caught it and held it out across the table. She looked at it for a long moment. Her face did not change, but her right hand, which had been flat on the table beside her work, turned slowly palm up. There on the inside of her wrist, beginning at the base of her thumb and moving toward her pulse, pale at first, barely visible in the candlelight, and then with each breath darkening, was its mirror. I had not known, I had not let myself speculate. I had done what I did because it was right, and because I had spent 12 years learning the difference between what felt urgent and what was true. And what was true was that I had let her walk out of a hall without calling her back, and I was not willing to be the kind of man who did that twice. The mark on her wrist was not the reason I had come. It was simply the bond, confirming what both of us had apparently already decided. She looked at her own wrist for a long time, then she looked at mine. Then she looked at me. 3 years, she said. Yes. You could have sent a letter. I could have, I agreed. What would you have done with it? She considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. I would have written in the margins, she said, which was not an answer and also was completely an answer, and which was so entirely her that I felt something I had been holding at tension for 3 years release, quietly, like a bowstring carefully unstrung. The compact requires witnesses, I said. For the formal recognition, 5 of senior standing, they're in Varneth. I didn't bring them. Why not? because I didn't know what your face would do when I came in. And I thought that if you told me to leave, I would rather there were no witnesses to that either." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the archive window, the last of the daylight was going, and the snow had started again, light and unhurried, the kind of snow that intends to stay. "I've been reading what you sent," she said. "The archive bundles, I know you read my notes." "Yes. You sent the Edrath Settlement Commission specifically, so there would be bundles to annotate." I did not deny it. I needed to know you were still yourself. "And the appendix I sent." "I have it," I said. "In my desk, it's excellent work." She looked at me for a long moment, that same calm, assessing look, the one that had, over the course of 2 months in my archive, made me feel more plainly seen than 35 years of being a king had accustomed me to. 3 years had not changed it. If anything, it had grown quieter and more exact, like a tool used regularly and kept well. "You read the compact," she said. "Extensively." "You found the mate bond clause." "It took some time. The 1089 version is poorly indexed." "I know," she said. "I wrote a note about the indexing in the margins when the settlement copy came through for restoration. No one acted on it." "I'll have the Varnath copy re-indexed," I said, "when we bring it back." Something shifted in her expression, not a smile exactly, or not only a smile. Something quieter than that, the specific settling of a person who has been braced for a long time and has at last decided to stop. She looked down at her wrist, where the mark was now as clear and dark as mine, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she looked up. "It supersedes the betrothal and pack law," she said. "You know I know that." I looked up the compact the same week. I had suspected this, and I wanted to see what you would do without knowing I knew. The candle between us was nearly gone. The snow was steady at the window. My wolf was outside somewhere, patient in the cold, because he had always been more patient than I gave him credit for when it actually mattered. "The documents are in the case," I said. "You can read them if you like. The dissolution is complete. There's nothing binding me to anyone." I paused. "And the bond is documented, both marks now, which is what the compact requires. The witnesses are in Varnath. The only thing left is whether you choose to come back with me." "The bond chooses," she said. "That's the argument." "The bond marks," I said. "You choose." She looked at me for a long time. Outside, the snow continued its quiet and unhurried work. The candle guttered and held. "I have 3 documents to finish," she said. "I'll wait." She picked up her quill. She worked for 2 hours. I sat across from her, and I did not read or speak, and she did not speak either, and neither of us found this difficult. The archive was quiet and cold, and the second candle I lit from the dying stub of the first threw warm light across the documents and her hands, and the dark settled mark on her wrist. I watched her work, not to watch, not to catalog, but simply because after 3 years of her handwriting arriving in bundles, I had the straightforward need to see the hand itself. When she finished, she gathered the documents into their cases with the same efficiency she had used in my archive, everything in its place, nothing rushed, and she put the penknife in her coat pocket and the ink pot away, and she stood and looked at me. "I'll need to tell the settlement librarian," she said. "Of course. He'll be annoyed. There are 3 more months of commissions." "I'll send someone competent from Varnath." She considered this. "He'll also be annoyed about that. He has opinions about competence." "I'll send someone exceptional," I said. She almost smiled. It was the same almost smile she had used in my archive when I had said something she found either correct or unintentionally amusing and had not yet decided which. "You didn't bring horses for 2, she said. "I have 1, I said. "We ride in shifts, or together it's 2 days. The hold has fresh horses at the Eastern Way station." "You planned for one possible answer," she said. "I planned for one," I agreed. "If the answer had been different, I would have ridden home and done something else." "What would you have done?" I thought about this honestly. "I don't know," I said. "I hadn't worked that part out. I've spent 3 years on this plan." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's either very foolish or very certain." "Probably both," I said. She pulled on her outer coat, the heavy one with the fur lining that I had seen her wear in the early mornings in my archive when the hall was cold, and she tied it and picked up the worn brown satchel, the same one, ink-stained and full, and she said without looking at me, "I'll see the librarian in the morning." We can leave at first light." I said nothing. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said more precisely. We left at first light. The road north was cold and clear, and the new snow from the night before lay unmarked on the highland track. She rode and I walked the first stretch, then we switched. Then when the road narrowed through the pass, we rode together, and she was quiet in the way she was always quiet, not absent, just contained, everything in its place. My wolf ran ahead on the track, and twice she watched him and said nothing, and once he turned and looked at her over his shoulder and then looked forward again, which was as much acknowledgement as he typically gave anyone. "He ran beside your horse yesterday," she said on the second afternoon, when the way station was visible below us, and the smoke from its chimney rose straight in the cold air. "All the way from the pass." "He did," I said. "He hasn't done that in a while," not a question. "No." She was quiet for a moment. "He's been waiting." "Yes," I said. "We both have." She did not reply, but her hand shifted slightly on the reins, and her mark, visible at her wrist below her coat cuff, dark and clear in the cold light, caught the pale winter sun, and mine answered it with a warmth I had grown used to over 3 years, but which, in her presence and with her mark visible, felt entirely new. The council session that confirmed the bond was formal and brief. Edrin had the documents ready, the 5 witnesses were assembled, and the marks were presented and confirmed in the way the compact specified. Both parties present, both marks visible, both of standing age, the bond of sufficient age and clarity to be indisputable. Myra answered the protocol questions with the same precision she brought to historical annotation, and when it was finished, she folded her hands in front of her and waited for whatever came next. What came next was me, offering her my arm. She took it. There was no ceremony that day. The formal claiming could wait for spring, for something warmer, for whatever she preferred. The 5 witnesses signed what needed signing and filed out in the orderly fashion of PAC members who have witnessed history and intend to be dignified about it. Chancellor Edrin paused at the door, and I thought for a moment he would say something either ponderous or pointed, but he only looked at us both and gave a short, precise nod, and then he left too. We were alone in the council chamber, which smelled of old documents and beeswax candles, and the cold that came in from the high windows. "The archive," she said. "The Northern Accord of 1144, your notes still have the dating wrong." "I know," I said. "I left it wrong." She looked at me. "So you'd have something to correct when you came back," I said. The silence that followed was 3 years long and also about 4 seconds. Then she shook her head, the small, composed movement of a woman who has caught a king being deliberately imprecise in a historical document as an act of longing, and she said, "I'll fix it tomorrow." "Good," I said. She looked at the mark on her wrist for a moment, and then at mine, and then out the high window at the Varnethhold courtyard where the first PAC members were going about the morning's work in the early winter light, ordinary and unhurried, the stone walls and bare trees and smoke rising from the kitchen fires. Unchanged. Only one thing in it different from 3 years ago. I had not planned a speech. I was not a man who made speeches, and she was not a woman who would have trusted one. What I had done instead was read 400 years of PAC law in the small hours of the night, and dismantle a council arrangement piece by piece across 18 months of formal sessions, and ride 3 days in first snow with a document case and no second horse, because I had spent 12 years learning the difference between what felt urgent and what was true, and what was true was plain and did not require ornamentation. She had come back, not because the bond required it, she had made that clear, and she was right, because she had spent 3 years reading the margins of what I did, and she had decided. That was all it was, and it was everything. Outside, the snow had begun again, the same patient, unhurried fall as the night in Edrath, the kind that intends to stay. My wolf was somewhere below in the courtyard. Her satchel was on the council table behind us, ink-stained and full, already belonging here. We stood at the window and watched the snow come down, and I did not need to say anything else, and neither did she, and the mark on my wrist was warm in the cold air, and I knew exactly what I had spent 3 years undoing every word for.